Good evening, darlings and deviants. My name is Lucy, and I'm just a little loony. Commander Masters released last week, and I finally gotten my hands on some of the pre-constructed decks from the set. And as it turns out, you don't actually need all of those silly colors in Magic the Gathering. The new colorless commander deck, Eldrazi Unbound, may not be an amazing Eldrazi deck, but it gives a lot of oomph to the colorless decks out there with a commander that lets you just play big spells. Whether that be big artifacts or the monstrous Eldrazi, there's plenty of cool stuff to do with this deck. So for this week's video, I decided I'd go over some of the more interesting cards that weren't included in the pre-con deck to get your deck building juices flowing. And I'll try to avoid cards that cost an arm and a leg too, because let's be honest, the deck was pretty expensive to begin with. So without further ado, let's start the show. I'll start with some fun creatures. First off is Awakened Amalgam. For 4 mana, you get an artifact creature golem with power and toughness equal to the number of differently named lands you control. Now it gets pretty big in most commander decks already, but in a colorless deck you're already running a bunch of utility lands. Wastes are the only lands that can share a name in this deck, and you're not competing with any other basics. In fact, if you wanted, you could run this deck with no lands with the same name, making this creature huge. Speaking of huge, Argentum Masticore is 5 mana for a 5/5 Phyrexian Manticore with First Strike and protection from multicolored. That'd be okay on its own, but probably not enough to make it into a commander deck, but its second effect is what puts it well over the top. At the beginning of your upkeep, you have to discard a card or sacrifice it. Wait, no, I swear it gets good, hold on. You see, like other Masticores in this game, it has that steep upkeep cost, but this one makes up for it by destroying a target non-land permanent equal to or less than the discarded card's mana value. And considering we're playing massive artifacts in a huge Eldrazi, there's not going to be a lot that has more mana value than we do. So if you don't quite have the mana for those big cards yet, ship them off to the graveyard to blow up an opponent's threat. Finally, Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter, is a 3 mana 1/2 legendary artifact creature with flash and flying that gets bigger the more spells you play, as long as their mana value is greater than its power and that they're colorless spells. And considering it gives all of our colorless and artifact spells flash, you'll be doing that constantly. Don't forget, that little bonus that he has also triggers off of Cascade. Surprisingly, there aren't that many colorless sorceries or instants out there, but there's not none, and let me tell you, there's some pretty good bangers in there. It's time for school. Specifically, we have the lesson card, Introduction to Annihilation. It's 5 mana for a sorcery that reads, exile target non-land permanent and its controller draws a card. This is pretty solid removal in a deck that doesn't typically get it in Commander. It's a little expensive, but colorless is pretty proficient in ramping, and we take what we can get here. Following that up is Gruesome Slaughter. Trust me, after you play this, your opponents will agree, this card is gruesome. For 6 mana, you get a sorcery that gives all of your colorless creatures the ability to tap and deal damage equal to its power to target creature. I think this card is really underplayed not only in these kind of colorless decks, but also in a lot of artifact decks. Keep in mind, it says all colorless creatures. That includes all of those little tokeny mirrors and all of the artifacts that are colorless. So from the biggest of Ulamongs to the smallest of Thopters, each one gets to jump into the fray. Obviously, since we're in colorless, we have a bunch of artifacts. So let's get this out of the way right now. Play Commander's Plate. It's not niche, it's not a cheap card, but if your commander is colorless, you play this card. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because if I didn't, then I would get swarms of contrarians that would find me somehow and call me out for not putting it in. It's a very good card. Use it. Quicksilver Amulet is an excellent card in colorless decks because of how easy it makes playing your big stuff. For 4 mana, you get an artifact that lets you pay 4 mana and tap it to put a creature card from your hand into play. And at instant speed, too. Did you get off to a slow start and your ramp is a little bit lacking? Well, not anymore. You just dropped a big dumb idiot in front of their face. Play your massive monstrosity for middling mana. Card draw is a little hard to come by in colorless, and since we're making so much mana, I think Staff of Nin does an amazing job at helping with the card draw bit. For 6 mana, you get an artifact that you can tap to deal 1 damage to anything. That's not that good. However, it makes up for it by letting you draw a card during each upkeep. Another option that's a little less multi-purpose, but a little bit more powerful in terms of pure card draw is Mind's Eye. It's an oldie but a goodie. This 5 mana artifact lets us pay 1 whenever an opponent draws a card, in order to draw a card ourselves. In a deck like this, we're bound to have a lot more mana and a lot less cards, so having more conventional ways like this to catch up on card advantage is fantastic. Finally, let's look at some lands that I think are pretty interesting, but I think we're kind of left out of the main precon deck. Because we're colorless, we can play all of the utility lands we want, so let's find some cool ones. First up is Labyrinth of Skophos. It's a land that taps for colorless, but we can also put 4 mana into it to remove an attacking or blocking creature from combat. One of the biggest downsides of Maze of Ith is it doesn't make mana. This one does and gives us something to do later when we're in the later stages of the game and need to do something else with our mana. But I don't need to tell you, if you have Maze of Ith played in this deck, even though it doesn't make mana, it's still very good. The Mycosynth Gardens is a relatively new card, but in a deck that naturally runs a lot of artifacts, it's amazing. It taps for colorless, but also lets us pay X and have it become a copy of an artifact with mana value X that we control. We can either double up on our powerful plays, or we can double up on ramp. Copying a Soul Ring or a Mana Crypt is probably the normal kind of play here, but you know what is really spicy? Copying something like, an Unwinding Clock, for instance. Now that is going to be really interesting. And I think that's more than enough for today. Did I miss any especially cool inclusions? Let me know down in the comments below. And hey, while you're down there, be sure to give me a like and subscribe. It lets me know I'm doing a great job and keeps this show on the road. And as always, thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, au revoir!